Let's welcome Narendra, India's leading energy expert. There's many things I'd like to talk today about, Narendra, with you, but I'd like to just start with giving you a chance to give your thoughts on the sort of evolving crisis in the Middle East. We've been sort of on the doorstep of the precipice cliff ever since we were together in Fujairah 3 weeks ago. We haven't stepped over the cliff yet in terms of the retaliation that has been expected from the October 1st events that saw Iran strike Israel. Your thoughts, and from an India perspective, where is this going? How do you think it plays out from here?
Well, of course, India is very worried because it's in our neighborhood, and we are kind of hugely there's a big interdependence between India and the Middle Eastern country, most of them, and so it's very high on the radar. In fact, when our Prime Minister met the Iranian president yesterday in Russia, that was right on the top of the agenda, and India was kind of assured that Iran is doing its level best to make sure that there is no escalation. And we have got kind of the similar sentiments coming out of the UAE and some other friendly countries in the region. So my own assessment as of today is that probably this might continue in the sense that Israel is probably has got its own agenda, and they're going to pursue in their own way. And the US is trying to persuade them to come to the negotiating table. But my sense is they think it's an opportunity for them. And until we know who is going to sit in the White House next, I think Israel will continue to behave the way it's behaving. And therefore, I don't see much hope there as far as all the parties concerned coming to the negotiating table. But the fear that it will escalate, go out of the control, and therefore the oil prices may go through the roof, I think that for the moment looks unlikely because Iran has shown restraint, and we have also seen that other stakeholders have also shown it. China is putting a lot of pressure, we understand, on Iran, and Russia is doing the same on Iran. So that means that even if there is a kind of attack by Israel, it's probably not going to be on oil and gas installations or on electricity installations or on nuclear installation. If kind of these three areas in terms of return fire from Israel are ruled out, then I think probably it would not escalate. And this already reflected in oil prices, as we can see, in the gas prices, as we can see. But that is still not really kind of gives a hope that we all need. Because for India, we have 9 million Indians working in that region, and we have Indian companies that invested heavily, and companies from there also have invested heavily in India. There is we are now working hard to build kind of India-Middle East economic corridor. There's a lot at stake. And India has invested heavily in terms of building goodwill and friendly bridges with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. And we hope the kind of plans that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia in particular have for bringing kind of a stability in the region and building a new future, which is more about economic prosperity beyond oil for everyone. They succeed, and India is actually trying its level best to support such initiatives from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and countries like Oman and Jordan and Egypt and a few others, so that we can together, India also joining as part of the India Middle East Economic Corridor, we can build a new Middle East, which is based on justice, where the Palestinians are also given their right in these, two states. And at the same time, Israel does feel threatened, or Iran does feel threatened. And whatever sanctions and all those things are there against countries like Iran are also gradually lifted. So India has a huge stake in terms of what happens there. And that's why, deep engagement with different countries, including Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia, UAE, as I mentioned. So we are quite hopeful. The only worry is when you look on the ground, there is oil everywhere, there is gas everywhere, and there is dynamite everywhere. So one really worries that the parties may try, but at the same, what if there is some accident? If there is a spark and there is some accident, you have dynamite, you have oil and gas, it would be very, very difficult to control. That's why what we need to do, we must do it today.
I wanted to get your thought. You mentioned earlier that your Prime Minister Narendra Modi met yesterday with the Iranian president counterpart in on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Russia. But most notably, Mr. Modi also met with the Chinese leader, and there was a sense that there's been a lot of tension between China and India in recent years since the 2020 border clash, where 20 Indian soldiers were killed by Chinese counterparts in the mountains there with the border disputes with China. What is the outlook for that meeting yesterday? What significance does it have just for the relationship? And then maybe we might build out on a more wider macro significance.
Well, of course, there is some thaw now, and which is I would say that we'll be very cautious, and I think it's a good beginning. And but there are many issues, and as you know, China is not an easy country to negotiate with or to deal with. And we have known China for thousands of years. You know, western part of the world, China discovered only recently, but they are our neighbor. We have known them for many, many, many centuries. So it's a very difficult country to negotiate. And China, at the same time, you know, they say something and they do something else. It's like a bus which says it's turning left, but it turns right. So it's a very difficult country to predict. But at the same time, you know, China, we don't look upon China as an enemy, but China is a problem and there are issues. Now, even to negotiate with China is very difficult, as I said, because they can go 2 steps forward and then 3 steps backward. And so we are dealing with it. But at the same time, I think what has happened yesterday in the meeting between Chinese president and our prime minister is a good beginning. We are very cautious, extremely cautious. And we'll see how it goes. The next meeting is now scheduled early next year, hopefully, and probably between the National Security Advisor of India and the Chief of Foreign Policy of the Chinese Communist Party. So let's say what comes out of it. For right now, for the people of India, the biggest issue is, of course, the border. We want to make sure that the China is not infusing into our territory or not attacking our forces. And the second step, of course, would be to kind of go for normal economic ties and the trade ties, which seems to be China's, focus as well. Chinese economy is struggling. They need markets like India for their products. And therefore, probably that might be the reason that China had shown some kind of, willingness to sit across a negotiating table. As I said, it's a good beginning. Both India and China put together are roughly 2.8 billion people on the planet. And together with Indonesia, we have 3 billion people in this part of the world. So you can imagine, what is at stake. But that said, at the same time, I think if you saw the kind of, good vibes and the goodwill at the BRICS summit yesterday, I think it's extremely encouraging with the Iranian president there, United Arab Emirates president there, with Ethiopia's president there, is the new BRICS now. And so
I might just come in on that point. I mean, just sort of connecting to the earlier point of how important Middle East oil supplies are to India. They are also critically important to China. I mean, you both have a very common risk or vulnerability to disruption from this region. And yet we don't see the muscle of China and India diplomacy at work here to try and resolve, to try and contain Netanyahu, it's all in the American camp. Where is China and India common ground on this particular issue? And are we just not seeing it? It's happening under the water, but it's clearly nothing overt that is obvious.
Well, the problem is that China does not believe in building that kind of relationship. China has its own worldview, and they just ambition seems to be to replace the United States as the superpower of the world. They think India or any other country, doesn't really matter, but that's not reality. Reality is that India matters. The only country which can counter the growing influence of China is India. And now, we have the size, we have population, we have a growing economy and everything. And at the same time, the problem is that if China wants to make that the future of Asia is like unipolar, dominated by China, China being the hegemon, right from the Middle East to the Pacific and all that is not acceptable to India. It's not acceptable to Japan, to Australia, to the United States, to Vietnam, not even to Singapore. So now that is the story. And the problem is, but China doesn't really care. They think they have their own worldview. And therefore, they don't want to build that kind of partnership where India and China can work together, let's say, on the Middle East. let's say, talk together with Israel, and let's say to work for the two nation, a home for the Palestinians. They can do that ideally. If you look at the size, look at the strength, look at their stake, in the Middle East. But they don't do it because they don't. China does not believe in partnership. They don't. They just want everything to be the Chinese. They want their own way. They just want to be the new United States of America. That's the problem. But they're not the United USA. They're not. They may be economically stronger than before. They may be militarily stronger than before. But China is not what the US is. The US is all about this great institution they have built over centuries.
Narendra, last word to you. I wanted to get to your saying. I mean, you kind of answered it at this last part of your previous comment, which was the BRICS are meeting in Russia. This is an emerging idea, but as you articulated, the challenge between China and India at the center of BRICS, kind of in a way, is the fracture before it even begins. But I wanted to get your thoughts as the BRICS emerge, and particularly through the prism of the global rules-based order. It seems to me a little bit that the US and Israel are blowing up the rules-based order. I mean, you saw Netanyahu's speech at the UN recently. He called 180 countries essentially dirt. US and Israel ignoring the International Court of Justice in The Hague and dismissing it. And there's bills going through the House of Congress at the moment threatening to arrest and sanction all of the employees of the International Court of Justice. So my sense is, where is the new rules-based order going to come from? Can it come from the BRICS as Israel and the US continue to go rogue?
Well, I think, when you look at the BRICS and the construct of BRICS and the agenda and the deliberation, it's more like a movement at this stage. Of course, it has got institutions now, let's say the New Development Bank, which is a kind of response to the World Bank, because World Bank, they refuse to go for any kind of internal or external restructuring or reforms. So the result is that majority of countries, the global south, they feel very frustrated. The problem is that, what they call the rule-based order is basically the Western, the rich countries' effort to ensure that they continue to occupy 100% space in the global cockpit, be it energy, be it security, be it climate, be it trade, be it anything, even vaccine. And it's that has led to frustration in the global south, especially the large economies like India and China and others. They feel, look, what's kind of, we need a new world order, but they want a status quo because status quo works well for the rich countries. And if you don't agree with them, they say, oh, this is not the rule-based order. So they have monopolized this narrative that only when you listen to them, only if the world kind of works, behaves, acts like the way they want is rule-based. Otherwise, it's jungle Raj. That's which is it's a joke. I mean, now the BRICS is a movement. What BRICS is not against the West. It's not against the rich country. It's basically the manifestation of aspirations and ambitions of the country, which are actually growing fast economically, socially, and even politically, depending the political system that they follow. India has a similar system like in the West. China has its own system. Russia has its own system. Iran, they go for elections and everything. They may not be as democratic as India or in the Western country, but they have kind of these democratic bones somewhere. So therefore, it is important that the world has changed. The West, the rich world, has to recognize, A, the world has changed. B, the gravity center for energy in particular has already moved to our part of the world. But the problem is they want a status quo, so they use all kind of things, sanctions against this country, sanctions against that country, that kind of law, that kind of narrative, because
I think
well for them. So this needs to be challenged. The BRICS is one movement that is challenging. It's one of the several movements that is challenging the status quo that West want to hold on because it has served their interest well for decades now, and they want to hold on to it. But the world is crying for change. Majority is crying for change.